All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to tackle one of the most powerful and, honestly, most misunderstood ideas in all of modern biology, the selfish gene. So let's just jump right in with a question. A puzzle, really, that even Darwin found perplexing. Why on earth does altruism exist? I mean, if everything's about survival of the fittest, why would any animal ever sacrifice its own life for another? Think about a honeybee stinging an intruder. It dies in the process, but it saves the hive. How does that make any sense, evolutionarily speaking? And for a long time, this was a real thorn in the side of evolutionary theory. But then, back in 1976, a book came out that just completely flipped the script. It offered a totally radical, new answer that pretty much reframed how we look at evolution itself. That book was, of course, Richard Dawkins's The Selfish Gene. And his big argument was that we've been looking at evolution all wrong. You see, we tend to think the main character in the story of life is the organism, the lion or the gazelle or even the species as a whole. Dawkins said, nope, the real protagonist is the gene. And he proposed this pretty startling idea. He said that we and all other animals are basically just survival machines. We're these temporary vehicles, almost like robots, built by our genes for one ultimate purpose: to keep those genes safe and help them make copies of themselves. That's it. Their preservation is our whole reason for being. And that right there, that's the absolute core of the gene-centered view of evolution. It means the real struggle isn't between, say, a lion and a gazelle. It's a competition between the genes for building a fast lion and the genes for building an even faster gazelle. The animals themselves, they're just the pawns in this ancient microscopic chess game. Okay, but let's pause right here, because this is where so many people get tripped up on this whole idea. Are our genes actually selfish? Dawkins himself was super clear from the get-go. Selfish is just a metaphor. Right. Genes don't have feelings, they don't have a plan, they're not sitting around plotting. The word selfishness is just a shorthand to describe the outcome of a completely blind automatic process. Look at it this way. The only genes that are still around today are the ones that were good at getting themselves copied into the next generation. It's all about the consequences, not consciousness. Okay, so if we accept that it's all about these selfish genes, how in the world does that solve our original puzzle about altruism? Why would a gene ever build a survival machine that's willing to sacrifice itself for another?
Well, the first big piece of the puzzle is something called kin selection. A gene that codes for, say, help your family, can actually spread through a population. How? Well, think about it. Your close relatives, your siblings, your kids, they share a whole bunch of your genes. So from a gene's perspective, helping your brother survive is basically helping a copy of yourself survive. The gene is still being selfish by preserving copies of itself, even if they're in another body.
And the second mechanism is what's called reciprocal altruism. This is basically the I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine principle, but for biology. It explains cooperation between individuals who aren't even related. An animal might perform a selfless act for another, with the unspoken evolutionary expectation that the favor will be returned down the line. It's like a genetic investment. It seems costly now, but the potential payoff for the gene survival machine is huge.
But, this really elegant, gene-focused picture wasn't the final word, not by a long shot. When this book came out, it kicked off decades of really intense debate, both in science and philosophy. A debate that is absolutely still raging today.
So you had critics like the philosopher Mary Midgley who said, look, this metaphor is just dangerously misleading. You can't say a gene is selfish any more than you can say an atom is jealous. And outside of philosophy, a lot of people were worried that this idea could be used as a kind of biological excuse for social selfishness, for cutthroat capitalism, you name it. And within science itself, the pushback was strong. A lot of scientists argued that the theory was just too simplistic, too reductionist. It kind of flattened the incredible complexity of life down to this one-dimensional battle of DNA, and it seemed to ignore all these other crucial factors, like how organisms develop, their environment, and the fact that organisms aren't just puppets. They actively shape their own evolutionary story.
And all of this scientific pushback, all this critique, has really led to a call for a much broader, more inclusive framework for thinking about evolution. It's known as the Extended Evolutionary Synthesis, or the EES for short. So the standard theory, the one the selfish gene is a part of, is very gene-centric. It basically defines evolution as a change in how common certain genes are in a population over time. And this change is driven by a few main forces, like natural selection and random mutation.
But the EES comes along and says, whoa, hold on, that's only part of the story. It argues that there are a whole bunch of other causes of evolution that the standard view kind of downplays. Things like how an organism actually develops from an embryo, how it can actively change its own environment, and even how some traits get passed down to the next generation without changing the DNA code itself.
So, if you want to boil it all down, the crucial difference is this. The gene-centric view sees evolution as a one-way street. Genes build organisms, and then the environment just kind of filters them out. But the EES sees it as a two-way street, a constant back and forth. Organisms aren't just passive vehicles, they are active agents that help construct their own evolutionary paths.
And this is what the EES really brings to the table. It adds all these extra layers. You've got niche construction. I mean, think about beavers building a dam and completely changing their ecosystem. That's not passive. You've got epigenetic inheritance, which is fascinating. It's about passing on traits outside of the DNA sequence itself. It just shows that evolution is way more dynamic and complex than we might have thought.
So, okay, where does this leave us? Does this new, bigger picture mean the whole selfish gene idea is just wrong? Well, not necessarily.
See, the scientific consensus is definitely shifting. It's moving toward what you might call a pluralistic view. The goal for most scientists working on the EES isn't to totally junk the selfish gene theory. It's more about putting it in its proper context, placing it within this much larger, more interactive and dynamic picture of how life actually works. It's about adding to the story, not just throwing the old one out.
I really love how the biologist Dennis Noble puts it. He suggests that maybe we should stop thinking of the genome as the composer of life's symphony. Instead, think of it as a massive church organ with, say, 30,000 keys. It's the organism interacting with its environment that actually plays the organ, creating the music of life. The genes are essential for sure, but they aren't the whole show.
And this all leads us to a final, pretty profound thought, and it actually comes from Dawkins himself at the end of his book. He says that we humans are pretty much the only creatures on this planet who can understand the selfish genetic forces that built us. And if that's true, if we can understand our own programming, does that mean we're the only ones who have the power to rebel against it, to choose our own path? It's a pretty wild question to end on.